It feels like 2025 is when the race for dominance in AI will see some winners. Like it's a big year. So who do you think wins the race? OpenAI, Meta, Google, XAI? Who do you think wins the AI race?
I would say I'm not going to predict. I'm going to say there's questions all over the place. And then we have this category question we call the $1 trillion question, which is like literally depending on how it's answered, people make or lose $1 trillion. And I think there's like, I don't know, 5 or 6 $1 trillion questions right now that are hanging out there, which is an unusually large number.
Yeah.
And I'll just hit a few of them and we can talk about them. So one is big models versus small models. Another is open models versus closed models. Another is whether you can use synthetic data or not. Another is chain of thought. How far can you push that and reinforcement learning? And then another one is political $1 trillion questions, policy questions, which, the US and the EU have both been flunking dramatically, and the US hopefully is about to really succeed at. And then there's probably another, half dozen big important questions after that. And so these are all just like, say this is an industry that's in flux in a way that even more dramatic, I think, than the ones I've seen before. And look, the most obvious example of the flux is sitting here in the summer, sitting here less than 3 years ago, sitting here in December of 22, we would have said that OpenAI is just running away with everything. And sitting here today, it's like, there's at least 6, world-class God model companies and teams that are, by the way, generating remarkably similar results. That's actually been one of the most shocking things to me is like, it turns out that once you know that it's possible to build one incredibly smart Turing test passing large language model, which was a complete shock and surprise to the world. It turns out within, a year, you can have 5 more. There's also a money component thing to it, which is to get the money to scale one of these things into the billions of dollars. There's basically right now only 2 sources of money that will do that for you. One is the hyperscalers giving you the money, which you turn around and round trip back to them, or, foreign sovereigns, other country sovereign wealth funds, which can be, difficult in some cases for companies to access. So there's maybe another $1 trillion question is the financing question. Here's one. So Sam Altman has been public about the fact that he wants to transition OpenAI from being a nonprofit to being a for-profit. The way that is legally done is that, and there is a way to do it. There is a way in U.S. law to do it. The IRS and other legal entities, government entities scrutinize this very carefully because the U.S. takes foundation nonprofit law very seriously because of the tax exemption. And so historically the way that you do it is you start a for-profit and then you raise money with the for-profit to buy the assets of the nonprofit at fair market value. And the last financing round at OpenAI was, $150 some billion. And so logically if the flip is going to happen, the for-profit has to go raise $150 billion out of the chute to buy the assets. Raising $150 billion is a challenge. So, is that even possible? If that is possible, then OpenAI maybe is off to the races as a for-profit company. If not, I don't know. And then, obviously the Elon lawsuit. So just because they're the market leader today, there's big important questions there. Microsoft has this kind of love-hate relationship with them. Where does that go? Apple's, lagging badly behind, but, they're very good at catching up. Amazon, is primarily hyperscaler, but they now have their own models.
And then there's the other questions like you laid out briefly and brilliantly, open versus closed, big versus little models, synthetic data. That's a huge, huge question. And then test time compute with chain of thought, the role of that. And this is fascinating. And these are, I think it's fair to say, $1 trillion questions.
Yeah, these are big. Like, look, it's like, okay, here's a $1 trillion question, which is kind of embedded in that, which is just hallucinations, right? Like, so if you are trying to use these tools creatively, you're thrilled because they can draw new images and they can make new music and they can do all this incredible stuff, right? They're creative. The flip side of that is if you need them to be correct, they can't be creative. And that's, the term hallucination. And these things do hallucinate. And, there have been, court cases already where lawyers have submitted legal briefs that contain made up case citations. The judge is like, wait a minute, this doesn't exist. And the very next question is, did you write this yourself? And the lawyer goes, I
mean, that's why with Elon with Grok,
yes,
looking for truth. I mean, that's an open technical question. How close can you get to truth with LLMs?
Yeah, that's right. And my sense, this is a very contentious topic at the industry. My sense is, to the extent that there is a domain in which there is a definitive and checkable and provable answer, and you might say math satisfies that, coding satisfies that, and maybe some other fields, then you should be able to generate synthetic data. You should be able to do chain of thought reasoning. You should be able to do reinforcement learning, and you should be able to ultimately, eliminate hallucinations. but by the way, that's $1 trillion question right there as to whether that's true. But then there's a question of like, okay, is that going to work in the more general domain? Like, so for example, one possibility is these things are going to be truly superhuman at like math and coding, but at like discussing philosophy, they're basically as smart as they're ever going to be. And they're going to be kind of, say midwit grad student level. And the theory there would just be they're already out of training data. Like they literally, if you talk to these people, like literally the big models are like within a factor of 2x of consuming all of the human generated training data, to the point that some of these big companies are literally hiring people like doctors and lawyers to sit and write new training data by hand. And so does this mean that like you have to, if you want your model to get better at philosophy, you have to go hire like 1,000 philosophers and have them write new content? And is anybody going to do that? And so, maybe these things are topping out in certain ways and they're going to leap way ahead in other ways. And so anyway, so we just don't, I guess this is, I'd say maybe my main conclusion is I don't, anybody telling you these big sweeping conclusions, this whole all of these abstract, generalized superintelligence, AGI stuff, like it, maybe it's the engineer in me, but like, no, like that's too abstract. Like it's got to actually work. And then by the way, you have to be able to pay for it. I mean, this is a problem right now with the big models that are like really good at coding and math. They're like actually very expensive to run. They're quite slow. Another $1 trillion question, future chips, which I know you've talked a lot about. Another $1 trillion question. I mean, all the global issues. Oh, another $1 trillion question, censorship. Right. Like, and all the, as they say, all the human feedback training process. Exactly what are you training these things to do? What are they allowed to talk about? How long do they give you these? How often do they give you these incredibly preachy moral lectures? Here's a $1 trillion question. How many other countries want their country to run its education system, healthcare system, news system, political system on the basis of an AI that's been trained according to the most extreme left-wing California politics? Right, because that's kind of what they have on offer right now. And I think the answer to that is not very many. So there's like massive open questions there about like what, and by the way, like what morality are these things going to get trained on
And that one we're cracking wide open with what's been happening over the past few months. Censorship on every level of these companies, and just the very idea what truth means and what it means to expand the Overton window of LLMs or the Overton window of human discourse.
So what I experienced, going back to how we started, what I experienced was, all right, social media censorship regime from hell, debanking, right, at like a large scale, and then the war on the crypto industry, trying to kill it, and then basically declared intent to do the same thing to AI, and to put AI under the same kind of censorship and control regime as social media and the banks. And I think this election tipped in America. I think this election tipped us from a timeline in which things were going to get really bad on that front to a timeline in which I think things are going to be quite good. But look, those same questions also apply outside the U.S. And the EU is doing their thing. They're being extremely draconian, and they're trying to lock in a political censorship regime on AI right now that's so harsh that even American AI companies are not even willing to launch new products in the EU right now. Like that's not going to last. But like what happens there? Right. And what are the trade-offs? What levels of censorship are American companies going to have to sign up for if they want to operate in the EU? Or is the EU still capable of generating its own AI companies? Or have we brain drained them so that they can't? So big questions.